Hello, I'm David Little.
And I'm Jill Gittins. Welcome to our podcast 7. This is Hahnemann's Advanced Methods, Posology and Case Management. Now this episode, our episode number 7, is the final episode in this series of podcasts. After this, we will be winding down the podcasts and turning our focus to preparing for our 1-month seminar, which we will be presenting in October. To find out more about the seminars, please go to our website at friendsofhealth.com for more details. Now, during the last 6 episodes, we have been introducing the guiding principles of homeopathic practice, and we have built on this layer by layer, concept on concept, podcast by podcast, introducing the fundamental concepts and the vital principles of homeopathy. Now we have reached a point where we can look at Hahnemann's advanced methods and his final refinements and development of dose and potency, which he evolved through his tireless experiments and discoveries, which he did throughout his entire life, from a young man to an old man. So now we have reached the 7th level, so it's appropriate that this is our 7th podcast. The 7th level, the 7th ray, the capstone on the homeopathic pyramid. So podcast 7 begins with a review based on the action-reaction model and how it relates to the 5 remedy reactions. This is a very important subject, so I'm going to mention a few things that you can study yourself. For Hahnemann's detailed explanation of the action-reaction model, you should read the introduction to the Organon and page 37 of O'Reilly's 6th edition, where Hahnemann explains this in 7 points of cure, 7 steps to cure. You can also refer to the Homeopathic Compendium. This is volume 1, chapter 14, Hahnemann's biomedical model. For an audio selection of this material, please refer to the Homeopathic Compendium podcasts, number 7, The Vital Force, the Action-Reaction Model. You can find these links in the description below.
The 5 vital principles. Finding the remedy is only half the problem. The other half is knowing how to give the remedy. To understand this, first comes the unity of the Wesen and the vital force. Second comes the action-reaction model. Third is aphorism 3 of the Organon, which elucidates knowledge of disease, knowledge of medicines, and knowledge of case-taking, including posology and case management. The 4th level is the 4 checks and balances, and the 5th is the 5 remedy reactions. These insights form the foundation of true classical homeopathy, but these guiding principles were almost lost.
It's very important to understand the complementary opposite actions of the physical and the dynamic planes. In our previous podcasts, we have explained the different levels of how this works. So first we have the physical and the dynamic planes. This gives one an understanding of the roles of opposites and similars in nature. On this basis, we look at the action-reaction model and how it relates to similar and dissimilar diseases. Next, we see how the action-reaction model relates to allopathic and homeopathic remedies. Now, we have the action-reaction model and how it relates to the response of the human organism to homeopathic remedies. This manifests as 5 remedy reactions, which we're now going to go through in detail.
In the last podcast, I raised the subject of the 5 remedy reactions and their signs, but I didn't give the corrective measures. Here we hope to offer not only a deeper view of the first part, but particularly concentrating on how to correct the vital force. So, on the basis of the action-reaction model, every homeopath needs to learn the 5 remedy reactions and learn the appropriate countermeasures to regularize the vital force. When explaining remedy reactions, Hahnemann used the geometric symbol of 2 triangles. The triangles represent the relationship between the different aspects of the action-reaction model. The first four are based on the symmetries of the primary action, and the fifth reaction is based on the symmetry-breaking randomness of the secondary action of the vital force. Number one is the pure amelioration with restoration of vitality. Only a true simillimum causes a rapid, gentle, and permanent cure. This is like two perfectly matched equilateral triangles, one on top of the other. First of all, the action of the remedy, the medicinal disease, which is the unique homeopathic remedy, overtunes the natural disease, replacing its sensation in the vital force. This causes the vital force to assert its superiority over the natural disease and reinstating normal homeostasis. Notice that the triangles are all in perfect balance, that the secondary reaction of the vital force is just enough energy to cause the healing, and there are no overreactions like you see with the antagonistic secondary action caused by other medicinal potents. So, pure amelioration with the restoration of vitality falls into two categories. When there is a perceptibly progressive and strikingly increasing amelioration, this is a sign to let the dose act alone, because the remedy is already hastening towards cure at a rapid pace, and any interference with this direct arc, this 90-degree arc, where it's moving so fast towards the cure, increasing day to day, any interference with any remedy may cause aggravation or a relapse of symptoms. This is one of the reasons that using the dry dose of the fourth organon, people were so careful, like Kent and others, to remind people not to repeat the remedy until there was a slowdown or at least a standstill and the relapse of symptoms. So repeating the remedy at this time can really cause relapses. That's why there's so many warnings. On the other hand, if there's only a slowly progressive amelioration, repeat the remedy at suitable intervals to speed the cure to half, quarter, or more less the time of a slow-moving single dose. Hahnemann says it could take up to 30 days, even up to 100 days of slowly progressing. And it's the right remedy, but the reaction needs more stimulation. And for this reason, he introduced the idea of giving the remedy to speed the cure. At suitable intervals, we give the dose. Therefore, the vital force picks up the energy, and the cancellation of the disease takes place, and the vital force moves towards cure at a better pace, half the time, 1/4, or even less the time it would take with the single dry dose by the fourth organon condition, the wait and watch philosophy. So in the sixth organon, he goes over the same territory, but he combines the information in 245 and 246 into one aphorism at 246, and in this combined aphorism, Hahnemann says basically the same thing. Anytime there's a striking increasing amelioration during treatment, and this is with the LM potency also, it's best to wait and watch and not repeat the remedy, whether it's a C or LM potency. Doesn't matter. Best to wait and watch. So, Hahnemann used both the single dose and the repetition of the remedy for the C and LM potency depending on the remedy reaction. He customized it every time. He had no mechanical method where he always did the same thing to everybody. He treated everyone with the individuality he emphasized in the first three editions of the Organon. So now we move on to point 2.
Number 2, remedy reaction. This is similar aggravation. This is the increase of the presiding symptoms and or the return of all symptoms. Now this is like a larger equilateral triangle and a smaller equilateral triangle.
Here you see, if you take the natural disease, which is represented by the red triangle, and you place it in the center of the larger blue triangle, the blue rims, the edges sticking out, represent the similar aggravation. Their overtuning of the disease vibration in the vital force is too strong, so the sensations actually increase for a period of time. This happens when the dose is too large, or the potency is too high, or when the remedy is given when it's not needed to speed the cure. If there's a mild aggravation, it's best just to wait and watch. It'll pass off. This may happen. We see this, and there's no real discomfort. It's just a mild intensification of symptoms in hours to in acute disease to days in chronic disease. It just wears off, and they move rapidly towards cure, so it's really no problem. The match is almost there. But if it's strong, you have to down-tune the dose with a smaller dose of the medicine and lower potency, and it's best to do this in liquid. And I'll explain that in a bit later in the parts on adjusting the dose. If there's a very strong aggravation, you may have to even antidote the remedy. And that brings us to...
This is accessory symptoms, number 3. Accessory symptoms, these are side actions caused by a partial simillimum. This situation may lead to what we call zigzag prescribing.
We talked about that. That's where the remedy tacks one way, and there's some accessory symptoms, and you have to go in with another remedy to try to correct it, and it tacks back. Zigzag prescribing.
Now, this is like, now we have our 2 equilateral triangles, but like this.
The points stick out. These points sticking out on the basic triangle are the accessory symptoms. There. Those are side actions of the remedy. And if the side actions are mild, you can wait and watch for the vital force to self-correct. If the actions are too far from the center of the disease state, they can become troublesome and actually block progress. So for this, you have to retake the case, making a new totality that includes the medicinal symptoms and the natural symptoms in a grand totality. Find a remedy that suits both states as one unified picture, and it'll correct the vital force. And again, you'll go straight ahead. But if you give another partial simillimum, maybe you tack back the other way. and tack back the other way. But as long as you're moving towards cure, some people mistake this as layers, as dissimilar layers coming up, which is in the layer concept, something I'll speak about at some later date. So many of these so-called layers are actually accessory symptoms. True layers come up when, in accordance with Hering's law, when the vital force is removing the remedial disease from the vital force and the vital principle itself. And those symptoms are layers. But these are accessory symptoms, which are the side actions of a non-homeopathic remedy, a partial simillimum. So where am I, Joe? Which
And
number?
now we're on to number 4. This is dissimilar aggravation. Dissimilar aggravation? This is the production of new and troublesome symptoms not appertaining to the disease state under treatment. This is what you don't want to see. It means that you've given the wrong remedy and it cannot be mistaken for a healing crisis. Now, this situation, using our triangles, this is like, now here we have an isosceles triangle, not an equilateral triangle. This is different. So we have our 2 triangles here. This is like an isosceles triangle and an equilateral triangle.
They just don't fit, and no matter what you do with them, you can't get them to overlay. The remedy energy is different than the natural disease. So they don't match, and there's no way you can make them fit because it's a dissimilar aggravation. So if it's mild, you can wait and watch for the vital force to self-correct. If the reaction is strong, you may have to actually antidote the remedy before it disrupts and enters into what might be called a proving. Then retake the case and give a more suitable remedy. Always try to retake the case. If you give a good pure simillimum, it'll go back to pure amelioration with restored vitality. You can correct the accessory symptoms. You can correct the mistunement of the vital force. But when it's the wrong remedy, you can't correct it with that remedy. You have to overtune it or cancel it. And this doesn't really happen so much if you use a proper small minimal dose. And we'll talk about that.
Now we come to number 5. This is an idiosyncratic reaction to dynamic remedies. This is a troublesome situation. It's a kind of allergic reaction. It's to use our triangles, it's like trying to place an equilateral triangle on top of what we call a scalene triangle. That means one with all the sides and all the angles on it are different.
As a triangle, it doesn't even make sense as a triangle. And this idiosyncratic reaction, it can't cover the natural disease, no matter what you do, no matter which points you try to combine. It's irregular, and it's also a moving target. You do one thing and it switches to another thing. You give a dose that's lower potency, they still aggravate. You give a moderate dose, you give a small dose, still aggravates. That's because the vital force itself is the problem this time. It's not connected to the symmetries of the primary actions represented by the equilateral triangles. It's a mismatch caused by the vital force. It doesn't know what to do. So in order to deal with that, if it's mild, you can wait and watch it out. And these people are hypersensitives. You have to be careful. This is where the medicinal solution and the minimal dose really count with these people. If they receive small doses, sometimes they'll still react. So if it's strong, you may have to antidote it and treat the case with special reducing remedies that reduce hypersensitivity. And you can see that in number C here. I think it's showing up there. Yes. Mm-hmm. So you can see here's a group of remedies that are specially tuned to reduce the hypersensitivity that leads to idiosyncratic reactions. Without these people are almost untreatable. But if you calm the vital force and take the disruption and the idiosyncratic reaction as the top layer and treat it first and calm them down, then you can treat them normally at a certain point. But you still have to realize they're hypersensitives. You need to adjust the dose, which can only be done when you use the liquid dose. You can't adjust the dry dose. It's too static. It's too mechanical. We'll discuss that later. So right now you can see that most of these remedies are ones you know. They're polycrest remedies. You use this as an elimination rubric. You look at the remedies underneath the rubric. And these remedies are mostly sourced from Boenninghausen and Kent. So the sources are good. I think this first one, nitric acid, might be jar. I don't really remember, but I think so. Nux vomica, sulfur. Obvious. Nitric acid, Nux vomica, sulfur. These remedies calm people down. So you can see there's belladonna and china and many common polycrests. Phosphoric acid. How do you pick these remedies? You pick the ones that are closest to the totality of the symptoms of the patient. If they're like phosphoric acid, they're indifferent, weak, and tired, then phosphoric acid will calm down the vital force so they become treatable. If they're weepy like pulsatilla will do the job. You got a ragged philosopher on your hands, maybe sulfur will do the job. If they got shaky feet and they're nervous and paranoid of the cops, maybe they need zinc. So you just look into the totality. You take the general rubric here, and this comes from Zandvoort's complete repertory. Generalities, remedies, oversensitive to, violent reactions to, remedies. So you can see causticum, silica, sepia, and other ones down in the ones. And underneath another rubric here, it says oversensitive, violent reactions to high potencies. Here they're the same remedies. All these remedies are in the big rubric. It's a sub-rubric that deals with people that are oversensitive to high potencies. But in general, the major rubric covers everyone. It has all the remedies. So you learn how to calm them down. And I think also it's been said that a negative mesmerism pass from the top of the head to the bottom of the feet, gently, downward motion calms down the hypersensitivity and also can help them respond to remedies in a more normal, natural fashion. If you can take them out of the idiosyncratic bandwidth and bring them back to the ordinary bandwidth, then the case can go forward. So that's an important subject. So right here I wanted to refer to Gibson Miller and his work on the relationships of remedies. So Jill, will you read that?
Robert Gibson Miller, 1862 to 1919, was an Englishman born in Kent in 1862. He was educated at Blair Lodge and the University of Glasgow, where he graduated in medicine in 1884. An Orthodox doctor who converted to homeopathy, Robert travelled to St. Louis to train with James Tyler Kent, and on his return he founded the Glasgow Homeopathic Hospital. His books and ideas are still very influential today for modern homeopaths.
Okay, here we have one of his works called Relationships of Remedy by Dr. R. Gibson Miller, Glasgow, Scotland. And you can see the authorities for these remedies are very dependable. Herring's Guided Symptoms and Kent's Materia Medica, Kent's Lectures on Materia Medica, Guernsey's Keynotes to the Materia Medica, and Boenhausen's Manual. So the sources of these remedies are very dependable, and you'll see that it names the remedy, then the complementary remedy, remedies that follow well, remedies that are inimical, remedies that are antidotes, and it also gives some idea of duration. So this can come really in handy with the remedy reactions. If you have a pure similimum and they're hastening towards cure, you don't need any complementary, you don't need any antidotes, you don't need anything but to wait and watch the cure complete itself. Now what we have here in the first column also are the remedy names. And you can see aconite there. I'll just pick aconite for an example. Maybe I can scroll in here a little bit. Okay, you can see aconite. Complements, arnica, of course, aconite and arnica. Coffea, sulfur. Now the aconite and sulfur relationship is very common. In fact, a number of Hahnemann's cases, you see him at times actually alternate aconite for a fever that is disrupting the chronic cure and then go back to sulfur. And remedies that follow well, these are remedies that a lot of times will clear up accessory symptoms because they follow well, they build on and often have a similitude that's close to the partial similimum. So this can help correct zigzag prescribing. There's no inimical remedies here under aconite. And antidotes. Here's where you find the antidotes. I wanted to talk about how you use antidotes. So you can see there acetic acid, belladonna, berberis, coffea, nux vomica, etc., sulfur, and a physical antidote, wine. Aconite's sensitive to wine. So here again, you have a group of remedies that are known to antidote aconite. So you've given aconite, it's a strong similar aggravation. You don't know what to do. It's too strong to wait it out. Maybe you have to antidote the remedy. So you look at the antidotes, and again, you pick the closest remedy. If they're like nux, give them nux. If they're more like sulfur, give them sulfur. Okay? Coffea, if they're all happy and elated to the point where they become nervous and hysterical, then coffea would be the antidote if aconite brought on those symptoms. So you use it as an elimination rubric. You look at the remedies within it, and you try to pick the one that is the closest. And for antidotes, it doesn't have to be as exact as when trying to find the similimum for a patient. Then the last line here, duration, 1 hour to several weeks. Now, aconite is known to be a short-acting remedy in most cases. It can reach deep in suppressed fear, old trauma. It has a deep action there, but in general, it's usually used in acute conditions as an absorbed plant remedy, often for fevers, as you all know. And it tends to have a shorter duration than, say, sulfur, one of its chronic complements. Notice that sulfur is complementary and it also antidotes. What does that mean? That means that it can move a case forward and act complementarily, but remove any negative remedy reactions in the process. So it builds on the previous remedy and it also regularizes the vital force. Nux and sulfur have that relationship. Hahnemann would often use a nux to calm a person down while giving sulfur in a series for psora. So I'm going to take a look and see if I can find sulfur here to compare with aconite. Should be at the end here someplace. Up. There it is.
Yes, there it is.
Okay, now you can see sulfur in the first column. And what's there? Aconite, of course. And nux vomica, of course. Those are often used as acute intercurrents when treating a patient with sulfur. And notice seriniums there for chronic disease. Psora, sulfur and serinum. They're complements. Okay? So Then we have remedies that follow well. We'll look at all those remedies around sulfur. Then we have some inimicals here. Sulfur follows LICO, but LICO does not follow sulfur. Kent. This goes back to the old rotation. That's sulfur,
Sulfur,
calc,
calcin, LICO.
lycopodium, back to sulfur. That's three complementary chronic remedies representing actually the plant, animal, and mineral worlds. Think about that. It's said that the whole materia medica can be based off the complements of those three remedies. And even a careful individualist like Kent had seen cases where he rotated those three remedies, but not mechanically. He did it by the symptoms. That's the important difference between artistic and mechanical prescribing. So then we get to antidotes. So you can see a list of antidotes. You're given sulfur and it's a runaway aggravation. Look at this list and see if there's a remedy. Do they fit Merck better than Pulse? Well, you should be able to recognize that. Okay, arsenic? Anxious? Anyone? So you get the point here, I think. And look at the durations. 60 days, 40 to 60 days. Aconite, an acute complement, a few hours to weeks. Sulfur, a chronic complement, up to 40 and 60 days. Now don't take these numbers exactly as literal. They're a comparison. It means compared to sulfur, aconite tends to be a shorter acting remedy and more suitable for acute diseases unless it's remote trauma. And sulfur is known to be a chronic deep acting remedy. So compared to aconite, you compare a few weeks to 60 days. It doesn't mean the remedy runs for 40 or 60 days. It could run for a year. It could run forever. But it's the idea of comparing relative durations. Remember the theory of relativity. Everything's relative. Everything's relative. So that's an important point. So, here we are.
If the homeopath understands the checks and balances that Hahnemann integrated into his practice, all the rest will fall into place. Now here we have the keys. The keys are similars cure similars, the single remedy, the minimal dose, the potentized remedy. If you keep the size of the dose to a minimum and control the potency and the repetition, then the positive reactions will increase and the negative reactions are reduced.
So how did Hahnemann come to all these conclusions? It was lifelong study. 47 years. 47 years in homeopathy, from the time that he wrote his first article on it till the time he passed away. Now I'm at the same age group as Hahnemann, and I've done my 40 years. So I've seen these things come and go myself. So we now enter a part called In Search of the Minimal Dose of the Potentized Remedy. Jill, can you lead us in?
Yes, so in this one we're following in Hahnemann's footsteps from his first experiments through the first Organon and all the way through to his final perfected methods in the sixth Organon. We can see this in terms of certain epochs, certain works that fit together, and the different editions of the Organon. And what we're really looking at as we go through this is how he refined his dosage and posology and how he introduced the major concepts along the way. So first of all, we can look at the early epoch, that's 1796 to 1806. In this epoch, you can say Hahnemann the founder and the great experimenter.
In 1796, in an article called Essay on a New Principle, Hahnemann used the word homeopathy for the first time. This article was later used as an intro to the first Organon, which I've been reading recently. And in 1801, Hahnemann introduced belladonna as a homeoprophylactic remedy for scarlet fever. Think about that. That early in his career, he already was using homeopathic remedies to prevent diseases. Yes, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So that early, and homeoprophylaxis is an important part, an essential, original part of homeopathy. And today with COVID and monkeypox and polio coming back in certain cities, it's become a big issue again. It's a live issue, and we'll talk about this when we study homeoprophylaxis in the courses. I'm not going to go into it now here. So I just wanted to point that out, that way in the earliest period, he was not only picking curative remedies, but he was picking preventative remedies. And he did this his whole life. And I've even heard it said occasionally that homeoprophylaxis is not part of classical homeopathy. Well, Hahnemann brought it up in 1801 to start with. If that isn't being part of classical homeopathy, I don't know what is. And he talked about it at several points in his career, which we'll notice later in this document. So, this is also the period of medicine of experience. That's why we called him the great experimenter, because this is the forerunner to all the editions of the Organon, and of course the Fragmenta in 1806 was the first real homeopathic materia medica. Unfortunately, it was in Latin, so it's a bit hard to access. But nevertheless, he already had an index that was acting like a repertory too. So the earliest epoch, he was already doing all this work already. But he had a long way to go with refining the dose and the posology.
So now we have reached the era of the first Organon in 1810, and this is the first full homeopathic expression of the full system, all his experience up to then, expressed in beautiful aphorisms.
The great reformer.
The great reformer. So, David, what are the most important points about the first Organon? What did he focus on?
Organon. I love the first Organon. I've learned so much from reading it. It's really been a gift. It's really been a gift to me. So, the first Organon, of course, vital unity, the vason, and the vital force. That's the essence of the first Organon. And the philosophy was similia and individualization. He constantly stressed the similar remedy and individualization, but at the same time, he was already investigating collective diseases for infectious conditions. He was already looking at that as early as this, already into homeoprophylaxis, already looking at infectious diseases, a special category, even in 1810. So that's really quite amazing about the first Organon. There's so much in it. I love it.
So now we reach to the Materia Medica Pura, the first edition, 1811 to 1821. Here we see the work of Hahnemann, the great chemist, and for the first time he presents a full collection of homeopathic remedies proven on healthy volunteers.
The Provers
With
Union.
this, yes, the first Provers Union. We owe all those young people and Hahnemann such a debt because the remedies they proved, the hundreds and thousands of symptoms they recorded, still form the backbone of our homeopathic.
Most of those symptoms Hahnemann proved on himself and his family. Most of them are from him, and the rest were his avid young followers.
So this was the first time the world had been presented with a totally new system of medicine. This hasn't happened before in thousands of years. Not only that, but it was based scientifically, it was properly proven, it was reliable. We are still using those remedies, we're still using those symptoms that they recorded then. So all I can say is we owe them so much thanks for all that work they did. The first Provers Union and Hahnemann and his work as a great chemist, amongst other things, in choosing and preparing suitable remedies.
In 1816, Hahnemann began to use drop doses of pharmaceutical liquids up to the 30C. So he'd make the remedy up in a centesimal fashion, and he'd use a drop dose and of the 30C up to the 30C, the dexilliant, which is what, 1 million to the 10th power, yeah?
Yes.
It's a lot of zeros. Okay, but he was using drop doses of the pharmaceutical liquid, of the X potency, the dexilliant. And he wondered because he was seeing some pretty strong aggravations and he was seeing some pretty strong remedy reactions, the kind we talked about. So he wrote in the Materia Medica Pura between 1819 and 1821 about using the smallest part of a drop. At that time, he was using a drop on powdered milk sugar and giving the patient just a little bit of the milk sugar. rather than the whole drop. He was reducing the size of the dose. While the potency went up, the size of the dose went down. There's a reason for this. There's a method in the madness. All right? So using a drop on powdered milk sugar and giving small amounts as a dose. And in these same years, in 1818, he introduced sulfur as a leading remedy for itch disease. This is long before psora was a main subject. This was in early days, but he was already investigating psora. Already. And then he published the second Organon at that time. So let's see. Where's psora and suppression and chronic disease in German casebook D22? This is the second Organon period. So in the margin of his casebooks, he was already writing down symptoms and writing itch and scab in his early years. 1821, he's starting the group anamnesis of psora. He's marking those symptoms with NB, meaning what? NB?
NB, yes, nota bene.
Note well. And this is in German casebook D22. So then we end up with him progressing to the third Organon, Jill.
Yes, the third Organon, published in 1824. In the third Organon, he continued a lot of the themes that you see in the first and the second. There's an emphasis on the use of chief remedy and intercurrents and alternations. This was due to the limited number of remedies they had proven at that time.
So at this time, Hahnemann's maybe working with 50 or 60 remedies. And he's already trying to treat the chronic miasm, psora, psychosis, and syphilis. Although he hadn't published a chronic disease, this is way earlier, years, 4 years earlier. So he had a limited number of remedies, and he developed a system which he integrated into the aphorisms for having a chief remedy that fit most of the symptoms and an intercurrent that supported the other side of the case, if necessary. And he would sometimes alternate between these until one remedy became dominant. Where he could use one remedy, he certainly used one remedy. Where he saw that one remedy wasn't complete, he sometimes would use intercurrents and alternations to try to correct the vital force. This method actually was in the aphorisms of the third Organon. Then where do we come to, Jill?
Now we come to a real important point, the watershed years.
Oh, the watershed years.
Yes, the watershed years.
What does that mean?
When Hahnemann introduced so many new things that it caused great shock and controversy even amongst his supporters and colleagues. Now, he published the chronic diseases, their peculiar nature and their homeopathic cure in 1828. And this is the era of Hahnemann, the great epidemiologist. So, David, what do you have to say about what he introduced in the chronic diseases, called shock and horror in the homeopathic community?
From the first to the fourth Organon and the chronic disease period, 1828-29, Hahnemann had stressed similia and individualization. He had noted there were collective diseases of an infectious nature, but he concentrated on individualization. And causation was something that he refuted more than he asserted, although he was always classifying, always collecting information. But the first 3 editions of the Organon were based on refuting the old school concepts of causation, insisting on symptoms, similia, and individualization were the way forward, not pathological names and other tags, but the actual symptoms themselves. And also he refuted the prima causa, the cause of the allopaths, the sole cause as the proximate cause. So people were used to saying causation isn't important. Take the totality of the symptoms, find the individual, give the remedy. That's it. And there's homeopaths today that think just like that, actually. Don't worry about cause very much. Don't worry about anything. Just individualize the symptoms, totality of the symptoms. That's everything. You don't need anything else. Well, in a way, they're right if you're talking about the first 3 editions of the Organon, but Hahnemann evolved past that with the chronic diseases, because there he introduced a whole new host of things. He introduced homeopathic pathology and epidemiology. Very few were ready for it. Even Herring went, what? Oh my God, what is all this stuff? Hahnemann, what's he saying now? I can't keep up with the old man. What's he talking about? He wondered about Sora. He said, Sora? Sora? What's Sora? It's more than a skin disease. It's constitutional in nature. My goodness, what a commotion it caused. So if you look at history and you look at the things he introduced the acute, half acute, and chronic miasms as infectious disease. He introduced the chronic diseases, Sora, psychosis, and syphilis. He talked about primary, latent, and secondary states. What was all this? The most sophisticated system of causation from refuting causation. Stressing the individualization, and then he comes around and says there's all these collective diseases underlining the individual symptoms. Everybody was aghast. Not everybody, but Bowenhausen was happy. Herring was confused. And what to say, it caused an uproar in the homeopathic community, and the allopaths seized on it too. Hahnemann's crazy. What do you mean itch is everything? Well, he didn't say itch was everything. Anyway, at this time period, Hahnemann introduced the first water dose, and it was a water glass dose. He took a glass of water, 4 ounces in it, put 1 pill in it, and he gave a triple split dose where he'd give 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 on 3 consecutive days to fairly strong patients. He didn't do it on sensitives. Then he would wait and watch. He was trying to see if that would hold deeper than just giving a single dose, wait and watch, because up to and including the fourth Organon, it was the single dose wait and watch philosophy that dominated posology. But he was already experimenting with the water dose. Why? Because the potencies are going up, he's reducing the dose further. Why? The remedy reactions. They can be prevented. You can't prevent them if you throw a random number of dry pills around. Hahnemann tried the tincture dose. He tried the pills. He started experimenting with the water dose because he was trying to evolve the methods. He's moving more towards his advanced methods. And that's why we call it the watershed years, because things really changed, and they changed deeply. Hahnemann is the father of modern epidemiology and preventative medicine, prophylaxis. Okay.
All right, so 1 year after the chronic diseases, he brought out the fourth Organon in 1829. So as you can see, the chronic diseases in the fourth Organon are companion volumes. The codification of information introduced in the chronic diseases was explained in the aphorisms of the Organon. So he brought the Organon up to date with all this information from the chronic diseases, which made it really stand out.
The fourth Organon's a groundbreaker. He continued to emphasize the totality of the symptoms, but he introduced a new classification of disease causations, exciting causes of acute disease, and the fundamental cause of chronic diseases are due to miasms. And he also introduced a very interesting field, the importance of understanding the attendant circumstances, which he named as the physical constitution, the mental and emotional character, the occupation, habit, and lifestyles of the individual, along with the social and domestic relationships, age, sexual function, etc. These factors were integrated with the totality of the symptoms. So you had the totality of the symptoms, the causations, and the attendant circumstances. Homeopathic classification. That was a new breakthrough. This is a groundbreaking moment for homeopathy. That's why we call it the watershed years, because in the 4th, 5th, and 6th, he introduced a new paradigm on top of the old one. He embraced the old one. It's still the foundation. Totality of the symptoms, familia, individualization. That's still the foundation. But on top of that, he laid causation, acute and chronic, and the attendant circumstances. Paying attention to what? Genetic factors. Physical constitution, emotional and mental character, Geistgemut, habit, lifestyles, social relationships. That's more environmental. So he's bringing out nature and nurture and integrating it into the aphorisms of the Organon. It's phenomenal work, actually. Every time I think about this, I become inspired and I see something new. See something new right now that I wish I could say. But I don't want to confuse myself and you. So, posology reforms. Now he took the one drop of the pharmaceutical liquid and he dropped it on 300 pills. And he took one of those pills as 1/300th of a drop. And he called that the dose. Some people went, what is all this? He kept giving the drop doses. Bowenhausen was complaining about that in his lesser writings. They're still using drop doses. We stopped that years ago. There's some people still using it today. I've seen it. That's like 500 doses per drop, 300 to 500 doses per drop. Hahnemannian doses, the minimal dose, the similia minimus, not the maximus. There's homeopathic maximus, when he used the biggest doses, the highest potencies. Anyway, that's a different story. So Hahnemann was using one mustard seed-sized pill as a dose, and he was already using olfaction on sensitive patients. Interesting, olfaction. He used that in earlier times also, but here he integrated it right into the aphorisms. Sensitive people, use olfaction. Just let them smell the remedy. That's a subtle dose. But he never thought olfaction was a weaker dose. We'll talk about that a little later. Also in these years, in 1831, I'll let you handle the 1831, Joe.
Yes. In 1831, Hahnemann published an article called Cure and Prevention of Asiatic Cholera, a very nasty disease.
Homeoprophylaxis, again.
Yes, we're back to preventing.
Cholera.
Yes.
Asiatic cholera, a killer disease.
For Hahnemann?
Homeopaths treated it.
No problem.
And they prevented it with cuprum and other remedies. There's a few more they used, but this was the main genus epidemicus remedy of the cholera that Samuel Hahnemann saw. He was using 30C, 1 pellet dry, or 1 pellet dissolved in a spoon of water. He's already playing with the water dose here. Chronic disease time, playing with the water dose and the triple split dose, playing with olfaction, playing music with them, attuning them to the vibrations of the patient, the Stimmung, the tone and tuning of the patient, looking at Verstimmung, the mistunement, the disruption, and trying to produce harmony. Prevention and treatment of disease, the great experimenter once again is back on the job. So,
now we move into the era of the fifth Organon. At this time, this is 1833, Hahnemann was already quite elderly. He was living in a very small, quaint, quiet, backward little German town called Cothen. And he was living with, I believe, 2 of his unmarried daughters at the time. Unfortunately, his first wife, had passed away, and he was now a widower. However, his life was about to change in an unexpected direction.
Enter.
This is one of the stories I love.
Madam Melanie.
Yes, well, of course, people travelled by coach and horses in those days. So the post coach arrived one day, and amongst the passengers was a rather smartly dressed young Parisian man, and who took a room at the inn. The next morning, the barber knocked on the door to see if the new customer wanted a shave.
The young man needed a shave.
Yes, if the young man needed a shave. And when the door was opened, he saw this beautiful, sophisticated French woman dressed in the height of Parisian fashion. And she was Melanie, and she had an interest in homeopathy. She had read Hahnemann's writings, and she had an ailment, and she wanted to come and consult the great man. She had travelled all the way from Paris to Cothen, which in those days was a really, really long journey, which maybe explains why she was wearing men's clothing. Anyway, she went to consult Hahnemann, and this beautiful young woman and old Hahnemann fell in love with each other.
And caused more outrage.
And caused an incredible amount of outrage. It's funny how such a dapper old gentleman as Hahnemann could cause so much trouble. And anyway, within the year, they got married, much to the astonishment and no doubt the consternation of his poor spinster daughters. And She whisked him off to Paris, to the centre of European life, from this quiet little German town all the way to Paris. Anyway, during his life in Cotton,
He wrote the fifth
he wrote the
organon,
fifth
yeah.
Organon, and this one, because of the use of the high potencies, really shows how Hahnemann was a really great mathematician and dealt with the kind of numbers and fractions that have only started to be used in modern physics to describe astronomical things, such as the size of the universe and things like that. That's the kind of numbers he was actually dealing with.
The great mathematician.
The great mathematician. So, David, can you tell us something about the fifth organon?
Yeah,
And
the
the
fifth
posology in
organon.
it.
Fifth organon is where he altered his posology, where he was using a single dose in strikingly increasing ameliorations, and the split dose at intervals, suitable intervals, for cases that were only moving slowly or moderately towards cure. He did it to speed it up. Speeding the cure, it's called. And the vehicle he was using for that speeding the cure was the medicinal solution. Even at these early dates, he'd already done the water dose in a glass. He'd already done spoonfuls with a pill dropped into it. He was checking out the medicinal solution in the aqueous dose very closely. And he was going up through the potencies. Late in 1829 and 30, there was a lot of interest in higher potencies, and Hahnemann felt a little conservative. He was afraid it was moving a little bit fast. And people didn't prove things as long as he did. They didn't wait as long as he did. Sorry, he waited 11 years before he went public. So he was shy about going public. He'd already used XXX, the 90C. So he knew the remedies above 30C. He had an epilepsy case where he gave the dose, it aggravated him, they had a fit, and then they never had another fit in their whole lives. Totally cured one dose. Staunch, short aggravation, he waited and watched the 90C act, the XXX, and it was a complete cure. So it's not that he didn't know about the higher potencies. He was using them, he was testing them, but he was a little worried. So he wrote a couple letters, one to Schroeder, and one was in response to Korsakoff's articles, where he said, there's got to be an end to something. We have to have some standard here. So why can't we call X a basic standard? He didn't say it publicly. He only said it in a couple private letters. He was querying the grounds. And of course the feedback was, well, you use them. You use 90C. So you moved past 30 already. So why can't we? And he went, yeah, okay, you guys are right. So in the fifth organon, he wrote a footnote to an aphorism where he announced that he was using up to the 300C, which was his C remedy. And he didn't mean C centesimal system. He meant C being, what, 1,000,000 to the 100th power?
The 300C is 1,000,000th to the power of 100.
Right.
That's so many noughts. It took us about half a page to print them all out in the Homeopathic Compendium, just to show how many noughts it really is.
And I actually confirmed a case in the Paris case books where he used the 300C of Nat Mur. So I was able to confirm what he said in the Organon, that he'd gone as high as 300C, which he called the C potency, meaning 1,000,000 to the 100th power. That's already phenomenal. And it's in DF6 for you research buffs. And high potencies. At this time, though, he was doing something with his high potencies. He was using olfaction. As a medium, he tested olfaction. In fact, from 33 to 34 in D38, German casebook D38, he's mostly using olfactions. Liquid dose olfactions. Put a pill in a vial in a 1 or 2 dram bottle, melt the pill, put some alcohol in, succuss the bottle. And he even coached people on strong, medium, and weaker doses on how far you held the vial from your nose and how deep you breathed. And we saw cases where he'd write down mild olfaction, strong olfaction. So he's already adjusting the dose of his olfaction by how far away you hold it from your nose and how deep you'd breathe. And in the fifth organon, he wrote the most detailed description of olfaction. And he was using them on most of his cases. I studied this case book. I was amazed to watch what he was doing. And the fifth organon has the fantastic details on olfaction. The sixth organon isn't as detailed. For olfaction, you really want to look at the fifth organon. So he's using mostly olfactions, and he's in Paris with Melanie, and she's his apprentice. She's his complete secretary. She writes down the cases for him. He writes in the remedies and some rubrics. She keeps all the records. She gave the man a new lease on life. And for all of us, she preserved Hahnemann's elder years and his elder health. They were once questioned, what are you doing with such an old man? He said, well, he's quite capable. And so he was quite capable, whatever that meant to Melanie. So anyway, new lease on life. And some of his closest disciples said, ah, he's like a young man again. Okay, wonder why. So in 1837, he published a preface to the chronic disease. In there, he released a medicinal solution in the most sophisticated manner up to the time. And he was using 1 pill into 4 ounces of water, adding some brandy, and using spoonful doses to the patient. And he wrote about this in the chronic disease preface. So, split doses of the C potency. This is long before the LM potency. And his case books at the time showed that he was actually using the dilution glass. He was taking 1 pill, putting it in 4 ounces in a bottle, adding some brandy, succussing the bottle. We'll discuss this in a little while. Succussing the bottle to mildly alter the potency so the patient never receives the same remedy, same potency twice in succession. He's stair-stepping his doses. Stair-stepping, bit by bit, higher, higher, 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps, 4 steps. And he was using a dilution glass, just like with the LM potency, and stirring 1 or more spoonfuls into the glass, taking 1 or more spoonfuls into the mouth of the patient. This is before the LM potency. There's some people who say, oh, that water stuff's all for the 6 organon, it's too complicated. I use high potency, throw a few pills in their mouth. Well, how many? Oh, I don't know, I just drop them. Okay? That other stuff is for the LM potency. It's not true. He developed the whole system for the C potency, and he applied it to the LM potency. So, the medicinal solution, 5th organon, 1837, chronic disease. So that brings us up to the
We get the
6th
sixth organon. Yes, his final work. He had finished his additions to the 5th organon, which comprised the 6th organon, and he had finished that work circa 1843. Unfortunately, he couldn't get the 6th organon published before his death. After his death, there was a delay of 78 years. The 6th organon was lost to the world.
This is indeed unfortunate because it means that his first generation of disciples, other than Bowenhausen, didn't even know about it. They didn't see it. Kent never saw it. Even Herring never saw it. Only Bowenhausen saw it because Hahnemann sent him a few cases. He was preparing Bowenhausen to take over, but for emotional, political, difficult situations, it never got published. And they never saw it. The first generation didn't see it. The second generation didn't see it. Third generation didn't see it. We're lucky we see it. It could have been lost. It was almost lost in a war. They had to ship it out and, hide it, wasn't it, Jill? Something like that?
Yes, they had to bring it through very disturbed conditions in Germany. And it was finally published by Dr. Richard Hale in German in 1921. And in the same year, the Dudgeon and Borghi brought out the version in English. So from 1843 to 1921, we didn't have the 6th organon, which is unfortunate. It was delayed so long, but fortunate that in the end it wasn't lost.
It was Dudgeon and
Borghi.
Actually, Dudgeon translated the 5th organon, and Borghi did the 6th. So anyway, Hahnemann, we called Hahnemann at this time the wise old teacher. Here he is in his advanced 80s, and he's teaching an entirely new system that's so sophisticated that only his closest followers could do it. And the ones that learned personally from him, they did it. They used it. But it was never published. So the wider homeopathic world never heard of it. Boenhausen was the most in the know. So, what do we got here? This is really important. Of course, he introduced the LM potency. But as I said, the medicinal solution, the dilution glass, olfaction, etc., was already being used for the C potencies. It was nothing new to the L-M potency. Why do they say dash? Because the real Latin name is L with a dash above it. That's the 50 and the 1,000. So they wrote LM to cover for the dash. But that's 95? 950?
Yes, 50 before
in Roman numerals.
1,000.
So I put a dash in it to stand for the dash above the L. So L-M potency. At least you can't confuse it with 950. Okay? So where are we now?
Methods of adjusting the dose to suit the sensitivity of the
The
patient.
sensitivity scale. Hahnemann said that patients were on a scale of 1 to 1,000 as far as their sensibility goes. So the sensitivity scale is why he developed the system, because the number 1 sensitivity would be so hyposensitive that you could pour a barrel of tincture down their mouth and they wouldn't react. Whereas 1,000 hypersensitive, you get near them with a remedy, they're liable to react. They're your hypersensitives. They're your idiosyncratics. They're off the scale. Okay? So you've got the sensitivity scale where you have to judge the sensitivity of a patient. Now, how do you do that? Well, if they're really hyper and nervous and have a bunch of allergies, and everything you say they get offended, you can pretty much figure they're a wee bit sensitive. They plop down in the chair, don't move, stare at the wall, look pretty blank, don't react very fast to what you say. Maybe they're not so sensitive, huh? So there's a whole method of doing this. I can't explain the details here. I'll do it in the classes. So the sensitivity scale. If they're sensitive, give them a small dose and control the potency factor carefully. If they're of moderate sensitivity, a 500, you can use moderate doses. If they're low sensitivity, you might have to give them big doses and they might need you to repeat the remedy to speed the cure, much more than the hypersensitive. They're the ones that take off on a single dose. This is the kind of homeopathy Hahnemann introduced in the second half of his life, from the watershed years onward. A lot happened. A lot of water under the bridge. A lot of water under the bridge. So, what have I written here? It says
Okay, this is
the number of
methods
pills, the size of the medicinal solution, the number of succussions, the number of glasses, and the number of spoonfuls can all be adjusted to suit the individual susceptibility of that patient and their level on the sensitivity scale. So, Hahnemann came up with the idea of never repeating the same exact potency and dose a second, third, fourth, fifth time. He said if you keep giving the same dose, same size, dry pill, repeat the same dry pills, dry pills, dry pills. He called this the unmodified dose. At a certain point, the vital force is liable to come up with antagonistic secondary actions, as it does with mechanical or material medicines. That's the difference between this antagonistic secondary reaction and a true homeopathic curative action, is that the homeopathic curative action is never an overreaction. It's a perfect action. It's a perfectly fine-tuned action. But if you don't know how to fine-tune the remedy, how do you fine-tune the action? How do you find your case management? How do you refine anything? So if you think in terms of standardization instead of individualization when it comes to giving the dose, you don't get the great results you do if you adjust the dose to the individual sensitivity of the patient. It's so important, so understudied. Anyway, unmodified dose. So he wanted to keep changing the dose, changing it up. Because what happens if you leave it the same? Either they get used to it or they overreact to it. The hyposensitives will get used to it. Remedy will stop acting. Same dose, same dose, same dose, same dose. Nothing happening. The hypersensitives, you have to adjust it finely. Be careful with your doses. The moderate sensitivities, you can be a little freer. Moderate sized doses, moderate sized repetitions. Of course, you don't need to repeat it all if it's a strikingly increasing amelioration, do you? So, am I leaving anything out here? No, I think I pretty
You
much
would
covered
actually, what we have here is in the sixth Organon, Hahnemann discusses the different vehicles of giving the dose. That includes using one dry pill, using medicinal solutions, using olfaction, using dermal application, and also mother's milk for infants. And all these things could be used as vehicles for remedial powers.
Okay.
This is the true similia minimus.
Okay, I inserted another little paragraph in here that you didn't see, Jill. And that's where in aphorism 246, 247, 248, he gives the advanced posology. He gives Hahnemann's advanced methods for this LM potency, but it includes the C's also. His casebooks show that he was using the C and LM potency side by side. It's not that the C's are better than the LMs, it's not that the LMs are better than the C's. It's that some patients do better on the C potencies, some patients do better on the LM potencies, some patients do best on both at different times. You never know till you try. Because now, with the C and LM potency and all the variabilities of adjusting the dose, the remedies can cover such a wide band of individuals, wide band of spectrum of diseases, wide band of sensitivities you cannot do with the dry dose. You cannot do it with the dry dose. So in aphorism 246, there's a passage where he says, even deep-acting remedies you can give daily for months, if necessary. Some people have read that and said, Hahnemann says that you should give remedies daily for months. He never said that. He said you can do that if it's necessary. He actually said you have to use your intelligence and experience to figure out the intervals, that they have to be personalized. He made suggestions about alternate or daily and alternate day doses, but he never said give the dose daily forever. In fact, I have looked at hundreds of cases, and to tell you the truth, I haven't found one case where Hahnemann gave the daily dose for months. That was not the way he practiced. He gave single doses, usually by olfaction, and he'd wait at least 7 days, 14 days, and watch the olfaction of the single dose go. Obviously, he thought those people were sensitive, that he wanted to give them a sensitive dose, that you didn't need to repeat on sensitives very fast. Otherwise, remedy reactions. Okay? So, he tended to use 3 to 7 doses and have his patient come back when he did a series of doses. And he watched his patients very closely every week to start with, so he'd give 3 to 7 doses at the most. Sometimes he'd just give a single dose and have them come back. And often he'd give them placebo. He did an on-again, off-again method. He didn't continue for months. So now we have people who say they're L-M practitioners that standardize everybody down to taking the same dose every day for a month before you even talk to them. How did they turn the most refined system of fine-tuning into a coarse, mechanistic, mechanical standardization? It's a great shame. It's a great shame. And there are others out there giving the dry dose daily for a month and having the patient come back. How did this mechanism slide into homeopathy? How did this standardization take the place of individualization? How did mechanism take the place of vitality? How did that happen to homeopathy? Think about it. I've told you some of the reasons already. Okay, so the single dose and striking increasing reactions, repeating the dose to speed the cure in slow-moving cases is the middle path. It's not You must give the single dose, wait and watch. No, 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 you must give the remedy every day or every other day for a month. It's neither. Or it's both, depending on the time and circumstances. So, 246, 247, and 248, he's using his advanced methods of posology. And he speaks about the fact that in aphorism 3, where he talks about the three knowledges, knowledge of disease, knowledge of medicine, third one's knowledge of employment, he said that includes posology. And as you see the organons evolve from the first organon to the sixth organon, he has the same aphorism, but the posology is updated. Every time the posology is more refined, more options, more flexibility, more individualization. Some people say, oh, it's too complex. I'd rather be a mechanist. They don't know they're being a mechanist, but they'd rather be a mechanist. Oh, it's so difficult. Making a medicinal solution is no harder than making a cup of tea. In fact, making a cup of tea is harder. How much effort does it take to drop a pill in a bottle? If it saves the patient, you don't want to go the extra mile? Okay, I think I better leave that for now. So yes, medicinal dry pill. He did talk of a dry pill dose in 6 Organon. In aphorism 272. He wrote, the smallest dose for a recent and moderate case of disease is 1 dry pill. Then he says, but if you want better action, you want a remedy that spreads to more nerves, you want to be able to give it at suitable intervals, you want to be able to make it flexible, you want to be able to tune it, you want to be able to adjust it to the sensitivity of the patient, then use the medicinal solution. And he uses the medicinal solution, as Jill said, by the mouth in aqueous form, olfaction, dermal application, and mother's milk to an infant. That's all in the 6th organon only. All these ways of giving the remedy, all these fine adjustments. Are we doing that today? How many? A few? I'm trying. It does take some effort. You've got to get out of the old box. Okay, so what did Jill say? This is the true similia minimus, the similar, the minute dose of the similar remedy. Okay, I think I'll give it back to Jill after that. Sorry if I got a bit carried away. I really mean the best, but in Hahnemann there's unity. If we understood the different stages of his life and his teachings, we could all work together. And enough of the debates, the useless debates. Take over, Jill.
Okay, just to sum all this up very quickly, that preventing the 4 unwanted remedy reactions, and the 4 unwanted remedy reactions, similar aggravation, dissimilar aggravation, accessory symptoms, idiosyncratic reactions. So to prevent these things that you don't want and get what you do want, the perfect simillimum. This is one of the main reasons that Hahnemann reduced the size of the dose from 1 drop of the pharmaceutical liquid, which he was using in the earlier eras, down to 1 or 2 tiny poppy seed-sized pills. In the Paris methods, that's 1835 to 1843, the founder further reduced the size of the dose to 1 pill diluted in 120 ml medicinal solution.
That's 4 ounces.
So then the remedy bottle succussed, and 1 or more spoonfuls stirred into a 4 ounce or 120 ml dilution
Anywhere from
glass.
1 to 12 succussions. I know the Organon says 8 to 12, but in sensitives I use 1. And insensitive I use 12, 15. Whatever it takes.
And so from the final dilution glass, you're going to give 1 or more spoonfuls given to the patient, and that's the 6 Organon aphorism 248. This method is suitable both for centesimal and 50 millesimal potencies. Now, for more information on the subject, which is very important, so I'd like to recommend that you refer to David's article, Hahnemann's Advanced Methods.
That's a really old article now. I need to update it.
This is at similarmum.com, and we have put the links in the description below so you can go straight to it. It says here, if you've already read Hahnemann's Advanced Methods, go read it again. You can also listen to David's audio podcast interviews, Living Organon and Hahnemann's Clinical Methods at friendsofhealth.com.
I highly recommend those old interviews Jill did on the podcast. They cover a lot of the territory I'm talking about now and more. They're worthwhile.
Yes, you have to consider this your homework and take it seriously.
Oh, final thoughts.
Yes, final thoughts.
Oh my. One of the reasons I'm doing these podcasts is the subject of the three knowledges is not being taught in a balanced fashion today. As to knowledge of disease, there is much emphasis on the mental symptoms, the grand sensations, but not much is being taught about causation, miasms, and layers of complex diseases. Knowledge of medicine is really expanded in many ways. We have more provings, more remedies. We have these fantastic data programs, software to use that makes repertorization at the tip of your fingers. But garbage in, garbage out. The old computer statement. What you get out is what you put in. If you don't know how to refine taking a case, then the computer's not going to help you. Some people are so computer dependent. When you go see the homeopath, they say, I went and saw this homeopath, but he just looked at his computer. He never looked at me, never touched me. Asked me a bunch of questions. What's it feel like? What's it feel like? What's it feel like? I didn't understand. He didn't touch me. I tend to like to touch a patient. I tend to examine them just to get in contact with what's going on in their bodies and who they are. Plus, they feel that touch. That's the mesmerismic touch. It's important in the healing arts. Staring at the computer screen the whole time can alienate the patient. So we have these fantastic computers, but we have to know how to access them. If we don't understand knowledge of disease, we don't know what to access in the materia medica or the repertory. So, then there's knowledge of employment. We just talked about that for the last I don't know how long. Knowledge of employment, posology and case management. This is an area I just feel is neglected. Look what Hahnemann introduced. Look how much he changed the posology from the aphorism 3 with the three knowledges in the first organon to the sixth organon. Look at the effort he went through. Look at the trials and errors he went through so we would know what a better way was. Yet some say, well, it's too difficult. What's too difficult? Psychic inertia is too difficult. Okay, if you can make a cup of tea, you can make a medicinal solution. All right, so these areas aren't really being taught as much and in depth in our schools and on the webinar circuit, which is taken over for the seminar circuit. We all need to look into this a little bit more and actively run some trials. Try it out. If you've been using the dry dose, try it out. You're not going to immediately understand it. You're not going to immediately know it. It's a sophisticated system. It'll take a little time. But if you put the time in and the effort and the extra mile for your patient, you will get the results. Yes, cures can be sped to half, 1/4 or less of the time. Cases that seem immovable can be broken up. If you think that every aggravation is a good aggravation, well, good luck with that. That's why I stress the 5 remedy reactions in these podcasts. I use these podcasts to try to get out a message of what is not readily known. I wanted to put it in the public domain before I go into the classes that I'm intending to teach. All goes well, health is well, life is well. As they say, ars longa, vitae brevis. So I would like to be one with the old wise teacher and teach in my old age, which is what I'm trying to do. Hahnemann did the L potency for 3 years. I've done the L potency for 50. So I have gained some insights into a system by applying it in the clinic. So, a lot of this has to do with teachings of one of my favorite homeopaths, James Kent, who I love dearly. And I love to read his philosophy. Even I just read it again. But when it comes to dose and posology, his idea that the size of the dose and the vehicle the dose is given makes no difference. It's a simple substance. It's all the same. He never read the Sixth Organon. If he had, he may have come up with a different opinion. So that's led to what I call the oops dose. You take the vial, you take a piece of paper, you tap the vial, pills fall in the paper. Could be 1, could be 10, could be 20. It's the same. Put it in the mouth of the patient. Same as liquid, same as olfaction, same as dermal contact, same as milk to the infant. No, it's not the same. Those are variables. Those are a system of flexible response. The same is what they don't do. It's the same. Okay? So this idea that the size of the dose and the vehicle doesn't matter has cost homeopathy a lot. Because before Kent, the size of the dose and the vehicle mattered. It mattered to Herring, it mattered to Jar, it mattered to Boynhausen. It mattered to Hahnemann. After Kent, it's all the same. No quantum, no quanta, no small packets of energy on the subtlest of planes that are so subtle only in Hahnemannian numbers can you even think about looking at them. So, it's worth testing. It's worth trying. It's worth the effort. Go the extra mile. Okay, I think I've said enough on this, Joe. I really do. It comes from the heart. I'm not trying to be critical. I'm just trying to open a door. And it's a free door. Anyone can walk through it. All the information's out there now. I'm not the only one. We're a small group. There's not a lot of us. But I'm no longer the only one. When I first brought the LMs to America, I was almost the only one. That's a long time ago, and it's been a long and windy road. And I've gone around in spirals, level by level, day by day, year by year by the year, drifting past. So I'm going to let Jill finish up. That's my final thoughts. I think too much. I would like to have more passive awareness. Not think so much, but sometimes I think about these things. I'm thinking about them right now. So finish up, Jill, please.
Well, it's time to say goodbye for now. Thank you for listening. I hope you listened to all the podcasts. I hope you enjoyed them. We enjoyed making them. And I hope you learned something about homeopathy and got some food for thought and some homework too. As I said, this is the last podcast in this series. So we will have to say goodbye for now. I hope we will see some of you in our seminar in October. That would be very nice. And of course, all the things I have to say at the end. If you want to support us, please click on like, subscribe, click the notifications for updates. For more information and updates on everything we're doing, visit our main website at friendsofhealth.com. The links are in the description. And I would like to wish you all good night and stay happy, stay healthy. Bye-bye.
I often have a closing remark on the closing remark. I don't think I have one right now. I think maybe silence is the best thing to close with. And a moment of silence. We do wish you all the best.